It's like zzzt, and zzz. We are a logistics company that can take cargo into space and, more importantly, bring any type of cargo back from space.
You went from a 17-year-old to building Europe's fastest moving space reentry company, which went from a prototype to flight in under 12 months.
I was literally doing military service at day, and then at night I was working on some first ideas for reusable spacecraft.
Space is humanity's greatest laboratory. Defense is democracy's strongest shield. And today, in workshops, in laboratories, in startups, a new generation rises, not to observe history, but to write it, where every innovation above drives progress below, where every breakthrough in defense preserves our freedom to create. Behind every breakthrough stands a founder with a story. Now these stories emerge to light the path for those who follow. Welcome to Rockets and Radars.
From 14 years of military service, including more than 300 days of deployment in Afghanistan, to convincing investors to put over 10 million euros into inflatable heat shields using the most advanced technology in spaceflight's history, I really would love to get into how did you get there since the very start. I don't want to make this only the best story of ATMOS, but also the best story of Sebastian, just to understand also the personal side of things that led you where you are right here. So let's get to the story. Before we get into the history, I would love to get into what is ATMOS Space Cargo in one sentence, if you can share with the audience.
If you want to bring it like really close down to one sentence, it's FedEx for space, right? Like, we are a logistics company that can take cargo into space and, more importantly, bring any type of cargo back from space. We're a logistics provider for space.
Very simple, very good pitch. You have worked on it a lot, I can see. Okay, great. And now from the personal side, who is Sebastian when he is not building ATMOS?
Yeah, I mean, I love to be out in nature. I always love to be in the mountains already as a child. And I would say I always loved the space industry, right? Like, I always love to think about new things that you can still do for humanity, right? Like, there's so many things that are just repetitive. You know, I also love history. I love to see the things that people have done in the past and that are repeating now, but also the things that have never been done before. And I think, you know, the space industry is one of those few areas where you can still make a real difference.
Okay, awesome. Now let's get into the history. Let's rewind 21 years. You are a 17-year-old living in a place so small that you called it in one of the articles the middle of nowhere, Germany. It's 2004. Most kids your age are playing video games. You're watching a private spacecraft cross the Kármán line for the first time in history. Bert Rutten launches SpaceShipOne and something clicks. I would love to get through that moment. What made you think that if Bert can do it, maybe I can too?
Yeah, I mean, at that time I had already read everything that I could about space shuttle and Apollo and, you know, the moon race. And it was always like big nations, right? Like states doing space travel. And here comes this guy from California, an engineer. Like, he had built like really strange looking aircraft before. And then he builds this SpaceShipOne with a very unique approach for reentry, actually, also. And I looked at that and I looked at the physics principles behind it. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. That is a smart idea on the one side. And he's very, very brave to try and take on that area where, you know, only states used to excel before. And it was really inspiring for me, right? Like, I thought, like, if that guy can do it, maybe I can too. And that was really, for me, the point where I said, like, at some point I'm going to become part of the commercial space industry, whatever that is, right? Like, I mean, today it's very obvious. Everybody looks at SpaceX and it's like, yeah, commercial space is the way to go. But, you know, 2 decades back, it was something that was unheard of, right? Like, people were like, it's impossible, right? Like, private companies cannot build rocket ships. That's a thing for nations. Yeah, that's what started the whole thing.
Yeah, amazing. And later, 2 years after, you made a very calculated decision to join the German military to study aerospace engineering for free. I hope I got that hypothesis right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is, right? So I come from a family of lawyers, and so I could have gone in that same direction, but I was always so fascinated by everything that flies and by space flight that I wanted to go in that direction. And I wanted to find a way of, on the one side, financing that education, right? Like getting my studies, getting a salary on top of that. But on the other side, also like, I mean, you just said it, right? Like a lot of kids at that age, they play computer games. I mean, I was very nerdy as a kid too, right? Like I was playing computer games. I was reading like tons of books. And I was not very good with people. And I think the one thing that the military really teaches you is how to work with really like super diverse teams, right? Like you have officers that have a master's degree, but you also have enlisted soldiers that might not have that level of intellectual training, but that are just, a good, hardworking people. And you have to work with all of them, right? And in spaceflight, I think it's the same, right? Like you have to lead like huge teams, and you have investors, you have highly skilled engineers, you have the technicians in the workshop that are super good with their hands. You have to work with lawyers to get licenses and whatnot. And it's like super diverse teams, right? And the military really teaches you how to work with such teams and how to make decisions and how to make things happen, right? Like really to just execute plans.
And then you get the raw discipline as well, which is always
Yeah,
good to have from the
absolutely.
personal side. What I would
Yeah,
love to understand is that a few years you being in the military, you were also writing your bachelor thesis with NASA Goddard on atmospheric reentry. And what
yeah,
I try
exactly.
to understand is you were literally living a double life, right? Soldier by day, rocket scientist by night, or am I wrong here?
Literally.
How are you? Yeah, you were.
Literally, I mean, I got my my bachelor's on atmospheric reentry. I did my master's on reusable methane LOX rocket engines with Airbus Defence and Space. And then after that, I remember actually at the school for paratroopers training, like to become a platoon commander. I was literally doing doing military service at day, and then at night I was working on a test stand for some first ideas for reusable spacecraft. Um, that was really, it was a double life, yeah.
How is possible to do? Physically, it might be impossible to not sleep, right? So how were you balancing those two things?
Yeah, I mean, there are some courses like training courses where you actually have some time to work at least a little bit in your free hours. And then afterwards, I mean, you probably know that after paratroopers, I joined selection for special operations. And from that point on, it was pretty much impossible to work on anything space related, right? Like, so for a couple of years, I had to really focus on that one area and just keep the dream alive in the back of my mind, and then come back to it later when I had the time. So I always say there's like a time for everything in life. You can achieve anything in life. You can just not do it all at the same time, right? So you got to be patient and go step by step.
Yeah, precisely. And next thing I'm super curious about is that your bachelor's thesis was called atmospheric reentry, or was about
Yeah,
that, right? Were you
yeah,
planting seeds for Atmos already
yeah,
then, or?
yeah. Absolutely,
Oh yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So the way that I looked at it was that I always loved space and I wanted more to happen up there. And for me, two things were very clear, right? Like there's only a very few things that really make money in space. It's like Earth observation, communication, and satellite navigation. And I thought always that the fourth pillar that would happen would be in space manufacturing, right? Like producing goods in space that are good for people on Earth, right? Because, going to the moon, going to Mars, planting flags, that doesn't help people on Earth, right? It's just, in the end, it's an ego thing, either from individuals or from nations, but it doesn't really bring any benefit to people on Earth. But if you produce things in space that can be used on Earth, then that makes a difference for people on Earth. And if you want to do that, you need to bring it back from space. So that's hypothesis number one that I had. Hypothesis number two was that the second reason that not more is happening in space is that it's just too expensive, right? And then you ask yourself, why is it so expensive? It's not because the technology is that sophisticated, right? Like, I mean, when you look at the way that rocket engines are built, gas generator engines, stage combustion engines, the engines that we build today, they are very similar to the engines that we built in the 60s, right? So it's like 50 years old technology. And the only reason that it's so expensive is that we throw those things away after every single use, right? Like we shoot them up to space and then we throw them away. And when you go even deeper and ask the why question one more time, right? Like, why do we throw it away? Well, because it's freaking hard to get it back, right? Like you have to slow down from orbital velocities from like 28,000 kilometers per hour. And you have to do that with heat shields. And those heat shields have to be super lightweight, because every kilogram that you put into the heat shield is a kilogram that you lose on your payload. Eventually, you won't get to orbit anymore. right? And that's why, for me, it was very clear for both of these reasons, you need to have atmospheric reentry technology, and you need to be able to reuse those things. That's why I did my bachelor's on atmospheric reentry and my master's on reusable rocket engines. And then in between that, I actually did my main focus of the studies on the management of technology-based firms. So I was already quite single-minded on eventually leading such a company.
Now, huge milestone before you quit your career in the army. 2017, you met your first co-founder, Marta, at an International Space University conference in Ireland.
Yeah.
She's literally launching the James Webb Space Telescope as a safety engineer. Again, super curious, how do you convince someone at the peak of their career to join a startup with an idea that didn't exist back then, actually?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's really a great question. And I think in the end, it comes down to trust, right? And trust is built over time. So as you said rightly, like I met her in 2017. We both went to the International Space University, and then I followed her career, and it was just magnificent to see what she had pulled off already, right? Like she got a master's in aerospace, a master's in physics, worked for NASA, worked for ESA, worked for CNES. Eventually, she was launch safety engineer for Ariane 5. And you have to imagine that if you work on Ariane 5, you are in the jungle of French Guiana, right? So in 2021, when I asked her to join that company, she had been in the jungle for like 2 years. So I think that tells you a lot about, the spirit and about the hardworking character that she has. So I trusted her. And then, of course, I asked her to trust me with this one. So actually on Christmas 2021, on Christmas Eve, I called her and congratulated her on that James Webb telescope launch. It's like a 10 billion mission, right? So I said to her, like, Marta, I mean, that's the climax of your career there, right? Like it's the best thing you'll ever do with Ariane. Ariane 5 is going to be phased out. Ariane 6 is a dead horse because it's not reusable, right? So it will not be able to compete with the SpaceX Falcon 9. So this is not going anywhere. So if you want to quit that position, now is the time, right? And I offer you to become the number 2 in this company as our COO. You report to nobody except for me. And she took a couple of weeks, and luckily, eventually said yes and joined the company. And that's how I got my first co-founder.
And regarding quitting, you also quit in October 2021. You leave the military and you immediately incorporated Klaus Space Transportation. And that was a massive leap, right? You were having a steady military career and you just transformed into a startup founder. I want to know, how was the transition like?
I mean, it was really a huge step. And what I also did then is I took pretty much all of my savings and also like the money that you get from the military at the end of your service when you leave, pretty much money that you earn in Afghanistan, for example. And I took it all and went all in, right? Like all the money on red, pretty much. This could have gone also horribly wrong, right? Like I could have run out of money in 2022, almost went bankrupt. So, but what that does is also it creates trust with investors, of course, right? Like they know that you are all in. They know that you are risking everything that you have and that you trust your idea enough that you believe it's going to be successful, right? And that's, of course, also a good sign for an investor who's then supposed to put his money in. Yeah, and of course, I did not do that just like that, right? Like as an officer, of course, you are trained to make plans for everything that you do. So what I did is at the end of my service time, I started an MBA program at the ESB business school in Reutlingen. I wrote the business plan and I got myself a mentor. And I think that's also something that I can only highly recommend to every aspiring founder. Find yourself a mentor, find somebody who has walked the way before, right? Like, and nothing against, let's say, acceleration programs and so on. They have their value. But what's really valuable is if you know a founder who has successfully created a company before, who has successfully raised money from VCs before. And in my case, that was Fabrice Testa, aerospace engineer, serial entrepreneur. And yeah, he took me by the hand. He looked over my shoulders when I was writing the first business plan, when I was creating the first pitch. He also made the first introductions to VCs because in the end, I mean, you know it very well, right? Like the VC world is quite closed off. So if you just cold email somebody, most likely they will not answer you. But if somebody who has a reputation makes that first introduction, that gets the introduction train rolling. And so that's what I did there.
And how did you find that mentor? Was it directly through the MBA program, or did you find him outside of that?
It was actually through ISU again. So Fabrice was teaching at the International Space University, and I heard about that, and I thought that could be a great match. And yeah, so I can only recommend that network, right? Like if somebody wants to go into the space industry, International Space University is probably the place to be. It's they call themselves the Space Mafia for a reason. So you have ISU alumni in every space organization in the world.
Yeah, actually, there are a lot of organizations European-based that I can just count that come from there. So there is something about it. Okay, great. Next, let's go through the final assembly of your dream team. So you've got Marta launching James Webb Telescope. Then you find Jeffrey Hendricks, a guy who's worked on the Herschel Space Telescope, ATF missions to ISS asteroid landers. I think his LinkedIn looks like a greatest hits album of European space missions.
Yeah.
And then you got Christian from the Mascot Alander. How do you convince those to join you again, like Marta did? Tell me a story about that.
There is no patent recipe to find your co-founder, right? Like you have to want it, right? Like you have to want that right person, and then there will be a way that you can find. So in case of Jeff, it was like I was already speaking with our first lead investor. Didn't know back then that he would become the first lead investor, but I was hopeful. It was Christian Ziak from the High Tech Founders Fund, HTGF in Germany. And Christian said to me, Sebastian, it's great that you understand atmospheric reentry. It's also great that you have team leadership skills. But for what you want to pull off now, like in space manufacturing, you need an absolute expert for building satellites. And you've just mentioned what Jeff has already done, right? Like he's pretty much a legend when it comes to AIT of big satellites, special satellites from Airbus. And so that investor, Christian, introduced me to Jeff, and Jeff and I, we hit it off right away because Jeff, you have to think he's a very visionary person, right? Like he would love to see industry in space, like, low Earth orbit industrial complexes with, huge solar panels and, modules docked to it and, all of those sci-fi dreams, right? And I think that hit a nerve because I am like that too, right? Like I love to dream really big, and I think we are a good team because he on the one side has that extreme level of experience in how to build a satellite, and I have a very good level of experience in how to execute very complex projects and missions on time, on budget, and to get the right teams together and to make sure that everybody is aligned and going in the same direction, right? So I think that's a quite good match, and then for our fourth co-founder, for Chris, he was actually brought in by Jeff. That's also one of the things that I can say only again and again, right? Work with good people because good people will bring more good people. And so Jeff knew Chris from that asteroid lander mission from a decade back again already. And he introduced me to Chris, and Chris is he's the German engineer, right? Like he's very skeptical, finding the error always. And so when we spoke for the first time at the Space Tech Expo in Bremen, he made me pitch to him pretty much, pitch the whole project. And then he took his time to think about it like properly for a couple of months. He also finished his PhD in aerospace back in the time on crushable structures for landers, actually. And he was with the Department of Landing and Exploration Technologies of DLR, which is like let's say the public entity that mirrors what we are doing commercially. And then eventually he also said, yeah, okay, that seems to be solid. I'm going to join. And so he became the fourth co-founder.
Okay, interesting. So you are the execution guy. Chris is the hard engineer. Then Jeffrey is the visionary. What about Marta then?
Marta and I, we are also, let's say, a perfect tandem in the leadership of this company, because I am somebody who is, probably also because of my background, willing to take risks and to move very, very fast. Marta is more careful. She doesn't like to take risks, and she likes to plan everything to the detail, right? So usually it's me like giving the rough direction of where we want to go. For example, with a new customer, I'm having like the first call, setting up the rough terms in terms of, pricing, amount of missions, and so on. And then she's the one that actually executes that operation in detail, right? So she's heading our operations team where we have business development, payload management, finance, human resources, mission control, logistics. So yeah, I give the rough idea for the plan. She's the one that actually executes it, right? So that's
okay,
how we
great.
work
A
together.
very good fit. Very good fit.
Yeah,
Okay,
indeed.
thank you for sharing that. Okay, now I would love to zoom out a bit and check the status of the company at this point. So since you have incorporated, what were the first thing that you have done as a full team at that point?
Yeah, so we started the company in October 2021, and then of course you do your standard steps that you have to do for every startup, right? Like you incorporate the entity, you rent a couple of rooms, you hire maybe your first employees, in our case a couple of working students initially, and then you start working on the two most important things, which is understand your customer and build a product. So we did a market study, spoke with a lot of customers, and then we worked on some technical feasibility, like helicopter drop test, plasma wind tunnel test, and so on. And with those two stones, we were able to convince the first investors. And so we did our seed round in summer 2023. Initially raised roughly 5 million, then later increased that seed funding round to more than 10 million. And that enabled us then to execute that plan that we had initially done bootstrapped. And then we started to build that first reentry vehicle that we call Phoenix. Marta came up with that name for that the little bird that goes through the fire and is reborn every time afterwards, because it's a reusable reentry vehicle. Yeah, and then we started to build that vehicle, always aiming for our first very big milestone, which is an orbital demonstration of that technology.
Awesome. And I will go a bit back to the test that you mentioned that you did in a helicopter. So you were doing a 1 to 10 scale prototype from 600 meters. For people who don't know what exactly were you testing, can you tell us a bit more why was this moment so important and so critical? And also what were you testing exactly?
Yeah, so actually the very first drop test that we did back then, that was just in the second or third months of existence of the company. And back then it was not 100% clear which would be our very first use case, right? Like, because, what we develop is platform technology for reentry from space. You can use it to return anything. And back then we thought that the first use case would be small launcher stages that need to be reused. Now, later we switched with Phoenix towards, let's say, biomedicine and also resilience defense applications. But the initial use case that we had in our mind was rocket stage reuse. So we took pretty much a standard example of a rocket stage. In that case, it was the ESA Aerospace Spectrum first stage. And we fitted an IAD prototype to it and dropped that from a helicopter and demonstrated how the air breathing inflation system, so using electric compressors, would work. Luckily, that also worked on the first try. And so that was good for a number of reasons. Like, we could test some basic elements of the technology. And it was also, of course, a very, very good marketing tool, right? Like to showcase to customers and to investors of how that technology could actually look like, and how we can, also execute technical tests on very short timelines with very limited budgets.
Okay, that was fast. I know prototyping is prototyping, but you did that fast. Amazing. Okay, let's get into 2022, a very hard year. Russia invades Ukraine. There's a global economic crisis, and you are trying to raise money for something called air-breathing inflatable atmospheric decelerator. How do you pitch this? The riskiest possible space technology during a world crisis.
Yeah, it didn't work. So we gave it our very best shot, right? Like, we pitched so many times, but it was just impossible to do, right? Like, as you said, there was the Russian attack on Ukraine, there was world economic crisis, so everybody was trying to keep their money in safe areas. And what we were doing is space, which is generally risky, and then re-entry, which is even more risky. So nobody was giving us any money, and that almost killed the company, right? So at that point, Marta, Jeff, and I, we were all working in second jobs on the side to just keep the company afloat. We didn't pay ourselves a single euro in salary. We put all the money that we had into the technical feasibility and into the market study, and but we kept going. We kept going all the way through 2022, and then at the end of 22, beginning of 23, like, the economic climate started to get better again, and also, like, our first lead investor, Christian Ziak from HGGF, he did two very good things for us. On the one side, he helped us pivot from that use case of rocket stage reuse towards building our own vehicle, which would make us independent. It would take us out of the supplier role and into a pretty much a tier one operator role, right? Like, we would not just sell technology, but we would actually sell a service. of course, service margins are also much higher. And the second thing that he did is he also helped us to get together a consortium of investors, right? So Amadeus Apex then joined as a co-lead, and then we found more really, really good investors to join, both locally, like, for example, MBG from Baden-Württemberg, a local investor, but also international investors like Seraphim. Seraphim is the #1 global space investor in the world. So they also joined that round, and a number of other investors too. And that's how we then managed to finally close that round in summer 23.
I want to get more into detail, but I have 3 last questions. Again, I'm a curious person, and I would love to get into this. During the dark moments, what kept you going further? What kept you and your co-founders believing you can make it? And was there a point where you were like, let's just leave it? Like, have you been thinking about that at least?
For me, it was never like, let's just leave it, right? Like, as I told you, it's like, it's been my dream for half of my life already, right? Like, I was like, I'm going to do whatever it takes, and a little bit more. I think there were like two things that really kept us going. On the one side, we really trusted each other as co-founders, and I think Marta said it in a right way a couple of days ago, that when shit hits the fan, when it gets really bad, #1 job of a co-founder is to make sure that the other co-founders are all right, right? So you got to take care of each other. And I think another thing that also helped me going is that I got a lot of support from friends and family. So even though you are working very, very hard, you must never forget that it's also important to keep something else in your life that is still like important, and that gives you the feeling that however bad it might be at work right now, there is still another part of your life, and there are people that are standing behind you. And it can get very, very dark in these moments, but you got to keep going. I think that's actually the #1 differentiator, right? Like, it's good ideas is nice, good tech is nice, customers is very good, of course. But in the end, I think the major difference comes from just keep going, right?
And apart from the great support that you got, do you think that your military experience had any influence on going through the dark times as well?
I think so, yeah, for sure. I think, what you learn in the military is that usually your limits of what you can take, the level of pain that you can take, is much higher than what you think of yourself, right? And it's very rare in normal civil circumstances that you go to those limits or above those limits. And in the military, you are often pushed there and maybe above those limits. And it gives you a very good feeling for how long you can, keep going. I think that level of
Sure.
discipline is helpful, yeah.
And the last thing that you have done in 2022 is that you actually rebranded the company from Cloud Space Transportation to ATMOS Space Cargo. Why did you do that decision?
That's a good one. I talked with our investors about this, and there were two reasons, right? So #1 is, like, I think for me initially, I thought I'm not Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, right? Like, I cannot put millions into this company. What I can put into the company is my trust and my belief, and I can put my reputation on the line, right? Like, I can literally say, like, if this fails, it's me, it's my name, right? So I put my own name on the company, and our investors said, like, Sebastian, people don't do that anymore these days, right? Like, it's not the time of Porsche and Bosch and Daimler anymore. Find an artificial name, let's say. And the other thing that they also said, and that's of course also right, is that we are a team, right? Like, we're a team of co-founders, so it should not be that there is one person standing so much in the spotlight. So it's much better to have a name that everybody feels good with. And so we put our communications team on it. They came up with some great suggestions, and when we then voted for the new name, Marta, Jeff, and Chris and I, we all loved ATMOS, like the atmosphere, space cargo. And so it was a super, super easy decision to make that change.
I actually love the name, so you did a great job there. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Let's get into the part of your journey that I call the funding gauntlet, where you got all of the money in a very short amount of time after each other. And you have gave us some details on how the whole process started with an intro from Kristen. But can you take us even more inside the process? How is it to get those investors on board? Were you strategic about it, or was it more or less about the warm introductions from your investors that you already go on board? You just want to understand the inside story
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. So, of course, investment is always a numbers game, right? Like, I mean, the way that investors look at deals is like they source like 100 deals. Eventually, they will invest into maybe 10, right? 90 they will turn down, and then one out of the 10 will really, become so big that it pays off for the losses of all of the others, right? So it's a numbers game, and it's the other way around also. So if you know that 9 out of 10 investors will turn you down, you have to speak to at least 10 to have a chance to get one on board, right? And then usually, one investor will not be enough. You will need, like, depending on the size of your round, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 or even more investors, right? So you can imagine how many pitches I did in that year. And then sometimes you just have the feeling that it just clicks with one investor, right? And in this case, like, especially with HGF, initially it was a very, very good match for a number of reasons, right? So Christian Ziak, our lead investor there, is also an aerospace engineer. He's also a former officer. So, like, on a personal level, we understood each other very well. And then the good thing about HGF is it's a highly respected fund with very good reputation, and they do a very, very thorough due diligence, right? So it's annoying to go through that process. I can tell you, it's really annoying. But once you've gone through it, it opens a lot of doors, of course, because other investors will see that and they will know that it was done properly, and then they will follow that. And in the end, it's always about, who leads around, right? Like, you might have like one investor or like two investors, like in our case, HGF and then Amadeus Apex, that jointly led that round. And once you have that, there will always be follow investors. And so yeah, you convince them. Eventually, they will give you a term sheet, and once you have a term sheet, you then align as many investors as necessary to follow those terms. And then, of course, you go through all of the legal processes, right? So you look for a very good lawyer to produce the documents. We work with a company called YPOC on those legal documents. I mean, the first time that you do that, it's quite intense, right? And I was happy or lucky again that I got a good mentor to support me, because Fabrice had seen those documents before. He knew what it meant to have like a liquidation preference, or what are reserved matters for the board and all of these things. I mean, I was an engineer and an officer, right? Like, all of these terms were new for me, so it's always good to have somebody that helps you with that. And then you produce all of those documents, you circle them back and forth over a couple of rounds of negotiations, and then eventually you go to the notary. And the deal is only closed once you are at the notary and it's really signed off by everybody, and the money has then finally been transferred to your bank account. That's when you really believe it, right? Like, until then, there's so many things that can still go wrong and derail such a round. And when we finally had our notary appointment in Cologne in summer 23, we were, of course, celebrating. It was an
Yeah, how
amazing
did it
moment.
feel to get that check in your bank?
Surreal, I have to say, right? Like, it was a dream come true, but also very surreal, right? Like, to think that you have been dreaming about this for like years and years, and then you've gone through such a hell year like 2022, where you were close to getting bankrupt. It was really surreal. And then you realize it. It takes maybe like a week or so, and then it's like, all right, now the clock
Oh,
is
let's get
ticking,
back to
right? Execution. Now it's all about execution. The clock is ticking now. You have like 1.5, maybe 2 years to execute the plan. It's full throttle, right? Like, just execute the plan.
But still, you got the ball rolling, because just in a few months since that round, OTB Ventures joined with 1.3 million in addition to the
Mhm.
seed round. And what is
Mhm.
super interesting, they usually or typically invest at Series A.
Right.
And my question on you would be, what do you think convinced them to break their own rules?
That's a very good point, right? So actually, I met Wojtek from OTB, who then became our new lead investor, already a year before, right? And we were exchanging, and I think he liked also the defense background that I was bringing to the table. I think he has been working with a lot of defense background founders before and had a good impression, especially about execution capabilities. And he's somebody who really looks for somebody who can execute a plan fast, right? Like, in startups and in the VC business, it's all about speed of execution. And so we met before, and then he saw how we were performing those first couple of months, and then he made that, as you said, quite unusual decision to go in at seed already, even though they are usually a Series A, Series B investor. And for us, it was a very good thing, because on the one side, we needed more capital, right? Because our circumstances changed, right? Like initially we thought we might be able to get a free launch to space on one of the European small launchers, but none of them were ready in time. So we had to replan. We had to get a launch from SpaceX on a rideshare mission instead. We needed additional capital for that. So we needed more money. And then having such a good reputation investor like OTB Ventures joining us, it was amazing for us, right? So we made that happen and included them into the equity round.
Fascinating. Okay, I will stay on the topic of funding. And apart from the advice that you shared to have a mentor that knows around, I would love to get into a time machine, get back a few years back. And I'm curious, what would you tell to your younger self regarding fundraising? It would be one advice that you would give to your younger self. What would it be?
I think one good advice that I could have used was that if you don't feel the immediate pull, let's say, from customers and from investors, consider if maybe you need to adjust the direction and do that fast, right? Because for us, we knew that there was interest for rocket stage reuse for the vehicle, but interest is not enough, right? Like you need to have hard facts, and hard facts is usually somebody is putting in either a lot of time or money or reputation, right? One of the three needs to be there. And if that is not there, then you have to adjust. And so for us, it was like once we switched towards building our own vehicle, the Phoenix vehicle, and starting to sell that to customers, for example, from the biomedical sector, we felt the real pull, right?
Mm.
Like we felt that there were companies out there that were, I mean, in the first call, willing to give us immediately an LOI or an MOU and then move to contract quite fast. And also on the investor side, we felt that they liked that approach where we could, build our own vehicle and grow that market ourselves, right? Like without any dependencies on, for example, a launch company. If you don't feel that pull, well, either you are really the only one seeing that opportunity and then you need to just push through it, right? You need to stay disciplined and stay on that track, or you need to pivot faster. So I would give myself the advice to pivot faster a little bit.
And actually, you nudged my next question, which was, how are you approaching the product development within years 23, 24, once you had the money in the bank? I'm very curious how the product has evolved after you pivoted to work on the Phoenix. How are you prioritizing the things to work on and all kinds of stuff? Or in other words, how are you utilizing the money to build stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, in case of our product, we're talking about an inflatable heat shield, right? So, I would say arguably the two most important things about that inflatable heat shield is the heat shield itself, right? Like the ceramic flexible fabric, and the system to inflate it, right? That's the key. Everything else, I mean, building a capsule structure, it's been done before, right? Like an onboard computer, it's been done before. Like all of the sensors, GPS, IMU, thermal sensors, that's been done before. Programming software for a satellite, it's been done before. So focus on those things that have never been done before and that carry the largest risk, and try to develop them. That's what we did, right? So we focused on that inflation system. We focused on the fabric. And in the end, it doesn't matter if it's then being used for a rocket stage or if it's being used for biomedical experiments in space. That can be adapted later. But if you solve the hardest technical challenge first, that will put you forward. So that's, I think, an advice that I can give for every product development. Figure out what is the key part of that technology, what is the hardest part to solve, and solve that first. Everything else will be solved on the sidelines, let's say.
Great advice. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, let's get to the end of the year. December 10th, 2024, Lori Garver joins your advisory board. This is the woman who championed commercial space at NASA, defending programs like COTS that prove SpaceX and others could do what only governments had done before. You first met her in 2012 when you were just a student. She probably didn't remember you or at all when you met then.
But I did.
But you really remember yeah, you really remember her. What did you say to her to convince her to bet her reputation on Atmos? Back
Yeah,
then, still a new
absolutely.
company.
Absolutely. I think you said it right? She was the one that defended commercial space against huge resistance in the US. I mean, you have to think of it this way, right? Like SpaceX is this little startup from California, like 20 years ago. Nobody believed in them. Nobody believed it would be possible to do what they pulled off. And eventually they became so big that they took the business away from companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin, right? You don't take business away from Boeing and Lockheed Martin without resistance, right? So she was really pushing for it, and she was putting a lot on the line to make that happen. And so I first saw her in 2012 at the International Space University again. Can only recommend that program. And then when I met her again, she was actually already an advisor to another company that was also in the portfolio of OTB Ventures. So we met again in Warsaw. And when I met her there, and I realized that there was potentially an opportunity that she could be an advisor just like she is for that company. I read the book that she wrote about that whole time when she was really like pushing hard for the commercialization of SpaceX. I realized that there's a lot of things that we really have in common, like the way that we see the space industry and the problems that the space industry has. And so afterwards, I sent her an email and I shared my thoughts there. And yeah, for some reason, she also thought that we are very much aligned in our thinking there. And luckily, she decided to really join our board, put her reputation on the line there, and open a lot of doors for us. So yeah, very, very, very proud actually that we managed to do that.
In that email, did you directly ask her to join you as an advisor, or did you just want to get feedback from her or share thoughts?
I think I hinted that I think we are very, very much aligned and that we could use somebody to represent us. I mean, us as the founders on the board, right? Because, in the board, you have, of course, investors representing their funds, but then you also have representatives for the founders, and Laurie is representing us. So she's our choice to make sure that our interests as founders are properly represented in the board. Very happy with the way that she does that.
So, well, she joined a really great company. Okay, great. Let's get into this year, actually. 2025. Let's get into the February. Got 13.1 million from the European Innovation Council, which is not just the funding, it's the EU betting on European space sovereignty. How does the responsibility feel like?
It is indeed a huge responsibility, right? Like the EIC is Europe's most highly reputed innovation funding scheme. 93% of all companies that apply for it get rejected. We belong to the lucky 7% right now. Usually the European Commission invests when they really think that it's a huge problem to solve for Europe, and one company needs to go for it. So it's a huge sign of trust and a huge responsibility, right? And of course, on the one side, you sometimes feel like, as a startup founder, to be very honest, you always feel like it's not enough, right? Like you have not sold enough, you have not proven enough of the technology. You always need to do more, right? But then on the other side, you also see like the dire state of the European space industry, right? And how, unfortunately, also a lot of decisions were taken over the last couple of years that were not putting us forward at all, right? Like we are literally 15 years behind the American space industry in a lot of fields. And it's, frankly said, personally, it's pissing me off, right? Like I think we have to get ahead. We have to find areas where we can actually leapfrog and make technological steps forward that are not just copy paste of what's been done before, but where we actually have a chance to become globally leading, right? Like world leading in a specific technological area. And I know that we can do that, right? Like in this
We
area,
already
like
did that.
Thank you. I mean, still a long way to go, but I think we have done a huge step forward already. Yeah, that's true. When it comes to inflatable heat shields, right now we are the only commercial company in all of Europe to push that forward to commercialization. There are state-funded projects that also work on inflatable heat shields, but we are the ones that actually want to make a commercial product out of it. And there we are the only ones. And the interesting thing really about inflatable heat shields is that, yes, they are more difficult to develop initially than, let's say, the classical ablative capsule technology. But once you have figured that out, I mean, you can bring back anything from space, anything. And knowing that, it gives me a good feeling that we are, I think that
On
we
the right
deserve
track.
the trust of the European Commission, and we're going to deliver.
Let's get into the most fascinating part of the whole story. 21st of April, 2025, Phoenix 1 mission launches on SpaceX Bandwagon 3. You are sitting, actually, in a small plane over the South Atlantic with a Starlink tapped or duct taped under the windshield, and you are watching your mission actually proceed. Walk us through those moments. I would really love to get into your head. You probably still have it, a very fresh view over what was happening. Tell us everything about how the mission went.
Yeah. I mean, when you run a reentry mission from space, especially on such a short timeline, very compressed into just 3 hours, you're operating on 3 continents, right? So you have mission control in Europe, you have the launch team in America, and then you have reentry observation in in Brazil, South America. You have to coordinate all of that, of course, before the mission. So there's a lot of planning that goes into that, like the concept of operation, the mission plan. We started to build like month ahead of the mission, and then just a few weeks before the mission, we actually had to change the plan almost completely because instead of coming to the Indian Ocean, we went to the South Atlantic for operational constraints on the launcher side. So. Yeah, that's also a lesson that I think you learn very well in the military. And there's always a saying that says like, no plan ever survives enemy contact, right? So it's you have to plan very detailed, but then once it actually happens, you have to be able to adapt very quickly to a changing situation, and that's what we did. So. We literally put antennas, ground station antennas, into the Brazilian jungle like days before the launch, and then I went down there also with a small team to observe that reentry. That's also something that I can only tell to every founder. You have to be where the important things happen, right? Like you have to be where you have to make decisions. You have to trust your team with everything else, but you have to be in that one spot where the most important thing is happening. So I went down there and we took a little plane. We flew out over the ocean, and it's indeed true. We had a Starlink duct tape to the cockpit. We had a lot of antennas on board of the plane. We had camera on board, and then because we had Starlink, we were able to actually follow the mission proceeding, even though we were 700 kilometers out over the ocean. Yeah, I remember that moment very, very well when we got confirmation that Phoenix is in orbit. We got a first picture from SpaceX of Phoenix circling the Earth with beautiful Earth horizon in the background. It was amazing. And then we also got a confirmation from our mission control team that the vehicle had switched on and that we were receiving data from ground stations. It was just such a huge relief, I can tell you, right? Like, I mean, the days before you have nightmares of the capsule not switching on, not getting any data, and then, you have a dead spacecraft in space, right? And try raising fresh money with that. It's a nightmare, right? And so when you get that data, when you get that picture, and I mean, it was just everybody on board of the plane was just cheering, and we were showing the picture around, and it was super cool. Yeah.
A successful mission, for sure. And what is super
Yeah.
interesting, actually, 4 days before Phoenix 1 launched, you got additional 1 million from Match VC. Most investors usually wait to see if you don't crash
Exactly.
and burn, but they double down. Why?
That's a good question. I think they made a pretty good deal, right? Like, because they came in at a much lower valuation than after the flight, of course, right? Like it's a huge value inflection point. So in the end, they made a very good deal, but it is, of course, a bet, right? Like I think there were a lot of investors also that were more cautious, that were more like, let's see how that first flight goes, and we can still invest afterwards. But I mean, it's called venture capital for a reason, right? So you have to look at what you see. You have to look at the technology. You have to look at the team. You have to look at the vision that's behind all of it. And then you have to just say, okay, I cannot control all of the risk, but it's good enough for me to make that investment. And sometimes it pays off big time, right? So I think they made a right call. And it was not just Match VC. We also had Expansion Ventures from Paris, French deep tech space investor joining also. And we had a number of smaller investors that were going into more into the defense direction, because at that point it was also quite clear that we would also enter that defense market. And all of them joined literally days before the launch. It was like a week before the launch. So we had decided that we would fill our uh, our cash reserves, let's say, to make sure that we have sufficient liquidity, whatever happens. Because I mean, it might just happen that the vehicle just doesn't switch on, and what do you do then, right? Like try raising fresh money then. So we want to make sure that whatever happens, we have enough runway. And so we did that and got some good investors to join us there.
And you mentioned defense a bit, and that's the next step I want to get into. In May 2025, you signed a collaboration with Arx Robotics, which actually is our previous guest. So it's a great timing to have you both together. And what I want to understand is to zoom out a bit, and given what's happening in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in Taiwan, how do you think your technology is important as a matter of national security?
Yeah. So Mark from Arx, he served as an officer just like me, right? So we have gone through pretty much the same schools. We have had the same experiences on deployments, and I think what this gives you as a founder is two very important advantages. Number one is you really understand deeply the problems that the military has. You also understand what works really well and what doesn't need to be changed, right? So it gives you a very good feeling for what type of product is really needed. That's the one side, and the other side is it gives you a sense of purpose. I think that's also something that Mark and I, and also some of the other founders, like for example Florian from Quantum, right? Like these founders, they just share that sense of purpose. For me, it was like I saw what was happening when the Trump administration got reelected. I saw the Munich Security Conference. I saw Zelensky in the White House, and for me, the consequence was quite clear, right? Like whatever we think about everything that's happening, one thing is for sure: Europe needs to become sovereign. Europe needs to increase its defense spending. Europe needs to make sure that it can defend itself independent of America against a Russian attack. And yeah, that was the point in time for me where I said, like, we founded this company as a civil space company, but we know also exactly what is needed for military purposes. And when you look at what's happening in Ukraine right now, we see that it's a drone war, right? Like it's the first full scale drone war that we see. We saw some of those things before in Syria, for example, where there were already like explosives dropped from small drones. But at the scale that we see right now, like millions of drones being produced per year by Russia and by Ukraine, we've never seen that before, right? And the one disadvantage that the drones have is usually they are limited in range, especially these small FPV drones, drone swarms. They are limited in range. And, what the Ukrainians showed with the spiderweb operation is that when you are able to bring those drones very deep behind enemy lines, you can have devastating effect on the enemy, right? Like destroying strategic bombers worth billions on airfields down in Siberia. I mean, it's an amazing Secret Service / commando operation that they pulled off. And we saw the same with Israel in Iran, actually, right? Like when the Israeli strikes happened, the first ones, they already had drones on the ground in Iran that were taking out the air defenses before the Israeli fighter jets actually attacked, right? So that capability to bring drones very, very deep behind enemy lines, that deep strike capability is something that is absolutely crucial. And since we are working on technology to return things from space, which is by definition global, we are also able to put military goods, and that includes drones like from Arx, to any place on Earth at any time. And that's exactly what we're working on together with Mark and his team at Arx, but also with the other members of the UXS Alliance. And that includes companies like, for example, Quantum Systems or Stark or Titan. So any type of military
Thanks for
goods.
sharing your perspectives.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey. I have one question. Where are you going right now? Where is ATMOS going in the short and long term from this point?
Yeah, for now it's super clear actually. We are building Phoenix 2. Phoenix 2 is going to fly next year in summer. Also very confident that we're going to stick to that timeline. We did it on the first flight already. I mean, we said we're going to launch in like 18 months. Eventually we launched in 20 or something like that. So it's, for space terms, it's like on point. So this team is delivering very well. So next year in summer, we're going to fly the next vehicle, Phoenix 2. It's going to have its own propulsion system, so we can decide where to come down, and we will come down in the Azores, Portugal. It's going to have its own solar panels so that we can stay in space longer. So on the next mission, we're going to fly like 2 to 4 weeks. And what we're doing is we're building 3 of these vehicles in parallel. So 2 we're going to launch to space, and 1 we're going to keep on the ground as a engineering model and spare. And in parallel to that, we go into that defense market and we start our first, let's say, first development steps towards Phoenix 3, the 3rd generation vehicle, which will be much larger. Like we're talking 10x more payload, and we're talking about reducing the price in half. So yeah, for the team, it's very clear now what we're doing, and it's really just about execution.
Thanks for sharing that. And now we are getting into the very last part of the episode, which are quite quick fire round questions. I have a few questions here, 3, 4, and I would love to hear answers on them in a sentence or two, if you can pack it into those. I'm super excited to get your answers here. So first things first, you mentioned Phoenix 3, so I will start with that. Starships can take 100 tons up. Phoenix 3 can potentially bring up to 25 tons down. When those two technologies meet, what does that do to the economy of Earth or the space economy overall?
I mean, Starship is probably going to be the very first rocket in the whole history to demonstrate a fully reusable vehicle. We can do that too, right? We can bring a rocket upper stage back, but a smaller one. So it can be a smaller medium launcher. And I think that idea is amazing, because the one big disadvantage that Starship has is it's so huge. I mean, we're talking 150 tons of payload capacity, thousands of tons of takeoff mass. It will never land close to population, right? And with our technology, you can. So same technology, but much more flexible.
Next one. 3 words that would have made 2004 Sebastian think you were from the future. What would those 3 words be?
That's really a tricky one. Inflatable heat shields, ballistic coefficient, and in-space manufactured organs. I would have never thought.
And now you can actually understand everything in just those 3 words. Amazing. Okay, next one, and even a trickier one. If you had to explain ATMOS to a 5-year-old, but you could only use sound effects and hand gestures, how would you do it?
Okay, it's like zzzt and zzzt.
Bam. The best pitch without saying anything. Great. Okay, next one. How many employees do you have now, by the way? It's around 40, right?
55 already as of today. We're growing
Ooh,
very
55.
quickly.
Okay. Then I would love to understand, how does ATMOS hire? What is your approach on finding the best people?
3-step approach, right? So number 1 is, of course, we screen all of the CVs, and we look for excellent people in general. So that's already a huge filter. Number 2 is actually, so far of the 55 people, every single person that we have has had their first interview either with me or with my deputy, with Marta. That's how important we think this is. So in the first interview, we always check like for motivation. Is that person really willing to put like that mission of going to space and back again above everything else? Right? Like that's number 1 priority. Number 2 priority is your team, people around you, because you will not be working hard if you don't feel comfortable. And only 3rd priority is your own well-being, right? So if you're looking for, work-life balance, please look for a different company. This is not your place to be. This is, we go to space. So that's always that first interview, checking the motivation, checking that organizational aspects like salary, starting date, and so on, they all work out. And only if that interview goes well with Marta or with me, then there's going to be another interview with the technical guys. So only then do we take the time of our engineers who have to build a spacecraft to interview, screen a candidate. And when they say, like, from a technical point of view, that person is really excellent, we want to have him in the team, then we make an offer, we negotiate a contract, and then we hire eventually.
Very unique approach. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining this episode. I have a few closing thoughts. There is a lot of young talent right now, especially in Europe. Maybe 17 years old, like you were back in the past, watching SpaceX land rockets and thinking about impossible things. They are being told their ideas are too ambitious, especially in Europe, where we haven't yet developed the culture of been risky. What would you tell that person staring at their laptop at 2 a.m., wondering if they should start something like you did back in the days?
Well, first advice is probably just don't do it, right? It's going to be a lot of pain. It's it's really hard to start a company. It's not fun, right? Like you see the founders like on stage and on podcasts and speaking about everything that went so super well, but that's just a public perception, right? Like the majority of work is just super hard and it's not fun at all. But if you find something that you really love so much that you are willing to go through all of that pain and whatever somebody tells you and wants to tell you that that dream is not happening, but you still want to go for it, then do it. Just believe in yourself. Maybe keep it also to yourself. Like don't speak too early about it. But once you have decided to go into it, then just do it. And then you actually also have to speak to people. You have to get that feedback. You have to also accept negative feedback to just become better. And then just do it. And especially here in Europe, you actually have the best conditions to start it, right? So you have excellent people here, like very highly educated people. There's a lot of money in Europe. It's sometimes more difficult to get to that money than in America, but there is a lot of money here. And we have huge problems, especially in the space industry right now, that need to be solved. We are behind in a lot of areas. So it's a unique opportunity. So if you really feel that you love this and you want to do it, then just do it.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. And totally last thing for early stage space founders watching this. You have built something from literally nothing to flight heritage in under 4 years. What is the most important lesson you would want those early stage founders take away from your journey?
So first important thing is make a very good plan. And then once you start executing it, things will go wrong. And then you need to adapt very, very quickly. You need to solve a lot of problems on the side. Number two is focus, right? There will be a lot of different things that you could do, and nobody is really telling you what you should do. Identify those things that are most critical to your product and to the development roadmap, and just execute those. Leave everything aside, and that enables you to move really, really fast, right? Like it's a combination of having a good plan, focusing, and then also willingness to take controlled risks. Because if you stick with, let's say, the old space approach of everything has to work perfectly at the first time, you will not succeed as a startup. You need to identify those things that absolutely have to work, and you need to accept the risk that some things that are not essential will not work. That's the way it is.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing this insight as well as other insights and your amazing journey. Thank you for your time, and I hope that there is some new talent that will join the industry just because of this 1 hour of the talk between two of us. So thank you so much.
And I'm looking forward to seeing you in person again soon, Martin.
Oh, yeah, sure. See you soon.